A tragedy. That's how the United Nations Committee Against Torture describes the killing of Michael Brown. Meeting in Geneva today, the panel said it has to respect the decision not to prosecute Officer Darren Wilson, but it also accused the U.S. of not being fully in compliance with the UN Convention on Torture. Specifically, the group was critical of the use of racial profiling and excessive use of force by U.S. police, but it did not specifically mention events in Ferguson. Joining me to talk about this is CNN's Phil Black. He's in London. And Phil, earlier this week, the same committee urged President Obama to be transparent on alleged CIA torture. Is the U.S. suffering a credibility crisis here on human rights?
Well, Brianna, this United Nations committee has certainly come up with a pretty long list of concerns, ways in which it believes the United States is not living up to the UN Convention Against Torture. Some of it is historical. You touched on CIA allegations of torture there. It also talks about rendition and what it says were abusive interrogation techniques. That historic stuff, it wants the United States to be more transparent about just went on during that time. It also had quite a bit to say about Guantanamo Bay, the fact that people are still being detained there indefinitely without charge and trial. It talks about attempted suicides there, mass hunger strikes, and it doesn't like the way that some of those inmates there, those detainees, are force-fed. Its other concerns: mandatory detention of some immigrants, including children, sexual violence in the military and in the armed forces, and the continued use of the death penalty. And it had some pretty tough language with what it regards as botched executions for the excruciating pain and prolonged suffering it says they cause. So not a crisis of credibility as such on human rights for the US, according to this report, but certainly not a clean slate, according to this UN committee, Brianna.
No, definitely not. And I wonder, because 2 weeks ago you saw Michael Brown's parents giving testimony to the committee in Geneva. Do you think that that impacted this assessment out today?
Well, when Michael Brown's parents testified at that committee in Geneva, they said at the time that what they wanted were answers from the UN. They wanted action. They wanted the UN to tell the world about what they say is happening in Ferguson. They also wanted some tough criticism of their broader concerns about policing across the United States. In the end, they got part of what they wanted because, as you mentioned, Ferguson nor Michael Brown, neither of those things gets a mention in this report. But in it, take a look at this. The committee expresses deep concern at frequent and recurrent police shootings and fatal pursuits of unarmed black individuals. It also noted numerous reports of police brutality and excessive force by law enforcement officials against certain racial and ethnic groups. At a press conference marking the launch of the report, members of the committee said that what has been happening in Ferguson, the events there, it is a tragedy, but they had to respect the authorities' decision not to prosecute Officer Darren Wilson for shooting Michael Brown. Brianna.